Hi, everybody. Regan Burr here from the Lupus Research Foundation. We have huge news to share with you. And I'm here today with our primarily funded, wonderful researcher, Dr. Timothy Newald, research rheumatologist and director of the Colton Center for Autoimmunity at NYU Langone. So, Dr. Newald, please tell us what is hot and new.
Hi, great. Yes, thanks for speaking with me today. We've been really excited that we found a grouping of gene variants, and so this would be not just one gene, but a group of genes that we think it's a brand new strategy for how to do genetics. But we found this way that we can predict risk of lupus in a much more accurate way, we think, and that we could actually find diagnosis in a much more rapid way for some people. It may not work for everyone, but we think for a group of people, this could really lead to a much faster diagnosis and hopefully prevent some of the problems that come when people are searching for a diagnosis when you don't know what's happening. So we're very excited about this, and we're trying to make the steps now to see if we can move this toward the clinic.
That's wonderful, Dr. Newald. This is some of the most exciting news that I could have ever hoped for. Because basically, what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, somebody like me, let's say I had walked into your clinic, or once this is in place, I could walk into your clinic and say, geez, I've got these symptoms, and some of my blood work is a little bit indicative of lupus, but other doctors haven't diagnosed me yet. Are you saying that you might be able to diagnose and potentially, with that information, prevent me from having to go through the big, huge flare up that I went through?
That's that's one of our hopes, really, and I think that's where this could play a big role. Because for people where there's already some suspicion of lupus, this could be the thing that would really make the case and really help you know what you're dealing with. And so, and it seems like it would work at a very early stage, as far as we can tell. This should work at these early stages when maybe not everything has happened yet, and that's great because that's when we would like to catch it to nip it in the bud, as you say.
Well, that is extremely exciting news. That is just music to my ears, and I'm sure to all our constituents' ears, because if you could prevent somebody from having to go through the, somewhat harsh treatment that is typically used for uh, big organ flare-ups, then you could save somebody's life and you could save somebody's quality of life. Oh, I want to rephrase that too. I mean, to me, this is huge because it's going to end up saving people's lives.
I, I'm really hopeful because this is one of the problems. There are many problems with lupus, but one of the problems is that often people go a long time waiting to get a diagnosis and figure out what's going wrong. And you know something's going wrong, and often you even see a few doctors, but no one can quite put their finger on it. And so that's been a long-standing problem that probably many of you listening, if you've been affected by lupus, you may have been down this path yourself. And bad things can happen, as Regan mentioned, during that time when when people don't know what you have, they don't know how to treat you, and then you're sort of at risk for some serious complications.
And that is what happened to me. I had had some symptoms from age 17, and maybe some symptoms even earlier than that. But some of my blood work was off when I was 17, but I didn't have enough wrong for them to diagnose me with lupus. And in fact, I was told at one point I don't have lupus and I probably never will. So I went on with my life. And then when I did start to get sick and finally got my diagnosis, it was a shock. And also, it was a very big flare up. So it was life threatening at that point because the lupus was attacking my kidneys.
Yeah, I think that that story, unfortunately, is fairly common, and it's definitely been a big problem as we've tried to deal with disease. So I'm hopeful. I'll say to put everything on balance. This is a test that will apply to some people, but not everyone with lupus. We have more work to do. We'd like to get to the other groups of people that this genetic grouping doesn't apply to and figure out. My sense is there will likely be some kind of yet undiscovered grouping that applies to them. And so I think we can get there, but this is an exciting first step where I think there'll be a group of patients where we'll be able to know in a much better way, and then we'll just kind of keep going and try to. I told Regan I feel like I'm sort of pulling on the string now and really starting to unravel something. So we're going to keep on going and see how far we can get.
Right. So thank you everyone so much for all of your support, and please keep continuing to support this kind of critical research. And we thank you because we're very proud to work with Dr. Newald, and we're very excited about this discovery. So, Dr. Newald, what is your next step?
So I think right now we are taking a look at this strategy. The strategy worked really well in lupus, and we're trying to apply it to other data sets in lupus and other autoimmune diseases to see if we can really get this working in other ways. And then, as I'd mentioned, we want to kind of pull aside the group where we feel like we've got this figured out a little bit better, and then look at the other patients where we don't yet and try to refocus again our energy on that group of patients to see if we can find the right formula that works for them. And I think the benefit is that as you progressively sort through this, you will, decrease the complexity. It just helps. It's almost like when you're doing a puzzle. When you start getting more pieces on the board, it starts to get a little bit better. And so I think that's the stage that we're in now, is that we're actually getting some of these things figured out, and hopefully the progress will be able to accelerate a little bit.
What are your expectations on this in the near future?
So I'm hopeful. It's hard to predict when progress happens, and I felt like we worked on this particular problem for a few years before we finally had some breakthroughs. But I'm hopeful. I think each step along the way you learn something, and you probably get closer to the solution. And so I'm hopeful that we might take lessons learned from this process and be able to get to some of the other groups within lupus. Maybe it's worth saying, that for a lot of people with lupus are aware of this, that lupus behaves differently in different people, and we're not surprised that there's not one genetic formula for everybody that has lupus. It's probably much more likely that we're finding what we're finding, that there are different things in different people. So that's really kind of the next challenge. But I think as we learn those sort of details, it could be very helpful, because it eventually it could help us maybe direct different treatments to different people with different underlying genetics. So that's the future. That's sort of more far future. I can't say that we can do that right now, but at least on the diagnostic space, I think it's progress that could hit the clinic soon, which would be great.
So, Dr. Newald, it seems like this predictive test might be able to be implemented fairly soon.
So that's my hope. I think that as far as a diagnostic test, this is something that you could roll out pretty soon, and it would be useful in the case, like you mentioned, if someone who's worried about whether they may have lupus. So I think that that's something that could happen soon. And in the farther future, I think it may help us categorize patients with different types of disease, and maybe for different treatments, which would be another big help. But that's a little farther out, I think.